I was always proud of Amanda's career. She had this ambitious drive that I admired, and I loved seeing her succeed. She worked hard, always putting in the hours, and she was constantly praised for her dedication. At first, it was just a few work trips here and there, nothing unusual. I was supportive, encouraging her to take on more responsibilities and travel for business. It was an exciting time for her, and I thought we were in a good place. But as the months went by, I noticed changes. Amanda started leaving for work trips more frequently, almost too often. It was always work-related, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. She would leave in the morning with a smile, but when she came back, she seemed a little off. At first, I thought it was just the stress of traveling, but the change was subtle enough that it made me uncomfortable. I tried to dismiss it, thinking it was just the grind of work catching up to her. She started coming home later and later, staying up at night on her phone or working on her laptop. I didn't mind the work part. I knew she had deadlines to meet. But I began to notice little things that raised my suspicions. She became more secretive with her phone, almost protective of it. I'd ask who she was texting or talking to, and she'd give me vague answers, brushing it off with a smile and a quick excuse about work. I'd sometimes see her laughing at something on her phone, and it struck me as odd how she would get so animated over a text message. When I asked about it, she would always say it was just something her colleagues had sent her. As time went on, her work trips became more frequent, and I started noticing how different she was when she came home. She'd be more confident, almost glowing, and there was something in the way she spoke about her boss, Daniel, that stood out. She'd mention him a lot, and I didn't think much of it at first. After all, they worked together and he was someone she had to collaborate with often. But I started hearing her mention him more casually, like she was talking about an old friend. It felt strange, but I dismissed it as her becoming closer with her colleagues. Then, there was Erica, the secretary. She'd come up in conversation just as much as Daniel, and the two seemed inseparable. Amanda would often talk about the three of them working together on projects and having dinners after long days. I started wondering about the dynamic between them. They all seemed so close, almost too close, but I pushed those thoughts aside. Amanda had always been the type of person who thrived on relationships at work, networking, getting along with her coworkers, building rapport. It didn't seem out of character for her to mention them constantly. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She started dressing differently, more polished when she returned from these trips. Her clothes became more professional, and her demeanor had changed too. She was more assertive, almost too confident for my liking. I thought it was just a phase, part of her growing career. Yet it felt like there was more going on, something I wasn't being told. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. I wanted to trust her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The more she traveled, the more distant she became. And it wasn't just the distance, it was the way she spoke about those trips, like she was leading a double life that I wasn't a part of. I wasn't sure if it was just paranoia, but I could tell that something had shifted. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew that things weren't the same. What bothered me the most was that Amanda had never been secretive with me before. Our relationship had always been built on openness and trust, and yet now, it felt like there was a wall between us. I should have trusted my instincts then, but I didn't. I didn't want to believe that the woman I had married was hiding something from me. And still, I pushed those thoughts down, telling myself that I was being ridiculous. The truth, however, was slowly starting to unfold, and I had no idea how much it was going to shatter my world. The truth hit me when I least expected it. One night I was sitting on the couch, flipping through some old photos, when Amanda's phone buzzed next to me. Normally I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but for some reason this time I couldn't shake the urge to check it. I knew it was a violation of trust, but I couldn't help myself. My hands felt clammy as I reached for the phone, and I hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. What I found made my heart sink. The messages between Amanda and Daniel were flirtatious, playful, and way more intimate than anything I had ever seen between her and me. They talked about their trips together, how she looked forward to seeing him again. There were photos, intimate ones, pictures of her and Daniel, and even some that included Erica. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was as if a switch had flipped in my mind, and everything I had noticed over the past few months suddenly made sense. They were talking about their threesomes, making plans for their next one. Amanda didn't just go on business trips with them, she had become part of their twisted little arrangement. The images and messages made it clear that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was an ongoing affair, one that had been happening right under my nose. My mind was racing. I felt sick to my stomach, my head spinning with disbelief. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? With not just one person, but two. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the phone in my hands, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This wasn't just a one-night affair, it was a full-fledged relationship, something I hadn't been a part of. The woman I had trusted, the woman I thought I knew, was hiding a completely different life from me. She had been going behind my back, lying to me about these trips, about what she was doing, and it wasn't just the physical aspect of it. It was the emotional betrayal. She had chosen them over me. She had decided that her connection with Daniel and Erica was worth more than the bond we had. I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt numb, like I was outside my body, watching everything fall apart. It wasn't just the affair itself, it was how easy it had been for her to lie to me, to keep everything hidden. I had trusted her completely, and she had destroyed that trust in the most heart-wrenching way possible. I started to question everything, every conversation we'd had, every time she'd told me she was on a work trip, every time she'd reassured me that she was fine. It was all a lie. Eventually I confronted her. My voice felt shaky, but I needed answers. When I asked her about the messages, about the pictures, she froze. She tried to deny it at first, saying it was just harmless fun, nothing serious. But as I pressed her, the truth came out. She told me everything. How she had gotten involved with Daniel and Erica during their work trips. How the three of them had spent time together in ways I never could have imagined. She didn't seem ashamed or remorseful. Instead, she seemed almost detached, as if it was no big deal to her. She said it made her feel alive, empowered, like she was in control. She told me she had enjoyed the attention, the thrill of being desired by two people at once. There was no guilt in her voice, no hesitation. It was as if what she had done was just another part of her life, something she had every right to experience. I felt my stomach churn with anger and disgust. How could she be so cold, so indifferent to the pain she was causing me? As she spoke, I could feel myself shutting down, withdrawing into myself. The betrayal was too much to process. It wasn't just about the affair, it was the fact that she had completely disregarded our relationship, our vows. She had thrown them away for a fleeting thrill, for something that was never going to last. I had given her everything, trusted her with my heart, and she had given it to someone else. I didn't know how to respond. My words felt hollow. What could I say to someone who had already made up their mind about who they wanted to be? The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved, was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't bring myself to fight for her anymore. She had made her choice, and I was no longer a part of it. Once I knew the truth, everything changed. I could feel it deep in my bones. This wasn't something I could just move past. Amanda had shattered the trust we built, and there was no going back. I couldn't pretend like things were normal anymore. I didn't know how to confront her, how to even begin processing what had happened, but one thing was clear: I needed to make her understand the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was about betrayal, disrespect, and the way she discarded everything we had together without a second thought. The first thing I did was pull back. I stopped being the man she could rely on, the man who would always forgive her and look the other way. I wasn't going to make it easy for her anymore. I knew she was expecting me to be angry, expecting me to storm off or yell at her, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I became distant, calculating, and cold. I wanted her to feel the shift, to feel the weight of what she had done to our relationship. She thought she could just have her fun with Daniel and Erica, but now she was going to see what it felt like to lose everything. I started to quietly take action. I didn't want her to see it coming, but I began slowly pulling money from our joint account. It wasn't enough to notice immediately, but it would add up. A few hundred here, a few hundred here, a few hundred there, just enough to make her start wondering where it was all going. I knew she would start to notice, and when she did, I would be ready for her. I was playing the long game now. I also started looking around the house, deciding what I could take that would hurt her the most. Things I knew were important to her, things she'd spent years collecting, things that held sentimental value. I sold some of it, just enough to cause her to feel the loss without making it obvious that I was behind it. I knew she would never expect me to do something like that. She thought she had everything under control, thought that I was too trusting to ever suspect anything. But I had been watching, I had been paying attention, and now it was my turn to take control. She didn't catch on at first. The money withdrawals didn't seem to raise any immediate alarms for her, and I kept everything else quiet. But I could see the subtle changes in her behavior. She started to act like everything was normal, like she could come back from her trips and everything would just fall into place again. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Every time she came home, I acted like nothing had changed. I didn't scream, didn't shout. I didn't even cry, but she had no idea that I was already making my move. I wanted her to feel the discomfort, to realize that her actions had consequences. She wasn't going to just waltz back into my life without some kind of reckoning. She had built this whole fantasy world with Daniel and Erica, and now it was time for her to face the fallout of her choices. Every time she came back from one of her trips, I could see that she was still living in that world, still thinking she could have it all. But I knew better. I knew the truth. And it was time for her to learn the hard way. As the days passed, I could see her growing more unsettled, more anxious. She started asking questions about the money, about the things that were missing from the house. But I just played it cool, acted like I didn't have a clue. The more she tried to figure things out, the more I pulled back. The harder I made it for her to understand what was happening. It was like I was watching a slow-motion train wreck. She had no idea what was coming next, and that made it all the more satisfying. I wasn't just getting back at her for the affair. I was taking back control of my life, of the things that had been stolen from me. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to make sure she felt the consequences. The day Amanda came back from her latest work trip was the day everything came to a head. She came through the door with her usual bright smile, the kind she always wore when she was coming home from a trip, eager to tell me about all the things she had done and seen. I could see the excitement in her eyes as she stepped inside, but there was something different this time. There was no comfort in her voice when she said, "I'm home," no warmth in the way she looked at me. It was as if she had grown used to being away from me, to being with them. It felt wrong, like I was just a stranger in my own home. But I didn't let on. I didn't greet her with a hug or kiss like I usually did. I just stood there, watching her, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. I had everything in place. The plan had been set into motion, and now it was time to watch it unfold. She didn't notice anything at first. She started walking through the house, dropping her bag and chatting about her trip, but I saw the moment she realized something was off. Her eyes flicked around the room, taking in the mess. The furniture had been flipped over, papers and books scattered everywhere. The calm, organized environment she had left behind was now a chaotic mess. She froze, looking around in disbelief, and then called out my name. There was no answer. I wasn't there. I had already left, standing just outside, watching her reaction from a distance. She ran to the kitchen, to the living room, to every room, trying to find some sign of normalcy, but it was all gone. The house was destroyed, and she couldn't understand why. I wanted her to feel that panic, that dread, to realize that this was all a result of the choices she had made. I had emptied the bank accounts, taken all the money that was rightfully ours, and left her with nothing. I wasn't just punishing her for the affair, I was forcing her to face the reality of what she had done. She had been so careless, so thoughtless, as she built this secret life with Daniel and Erica, and now she was going to feel the consequences of those actions. The house was a wreck, with no trace of the comfortable life we once had. Everything she thought she could rely on, everything that had brought her a sense of stability was gone. I had made sure of that. The things she valued most were the first to go. I sold the jewelry she cherished, the artwork she adored, and even her favorite pieces of furniture, everything she had worked so hard to accumulate and thought was safe. It wasn't about the money, it was about making her realize what she had lost. I watched as she walked through the house, her face a mask of confusion and panic. She began calling my name again, louder this time, but there was still no response. I wasn't there to comfort her. I wasn't there to tell her it would be okay. She had crossed a line, and I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. I wanted her to know that I was done with the lies, done with the deception, done with everything she had done to destroy us. When she finally started to put the pieces together, it was too late. She realized the money was gone. She found the accounts drained, the credit cards maxed out, and she had no idea where it had all gone. The panic set in then. I could hear her voice quiver as she tried to call the bank, to find some way to fix the mess she was now in. But there was nothing she could do. I had taken everything, left her with no support, no safety net. She was on her own. I was standing outside, watching her struggle, and part of me felt satisfied. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, and now she had nothing. She was in the same position I had been when I first found out about her affair, alone, broken, betrayed. But unlike her, I wasn't going to wait around for her to come back and fix things. She had destroyed us, and now she had to face the reality of it all. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. The destruction of our home wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming what was mine. It was about making sure she understood the price of betrayal. And in that moment, as I walked further away from the wreckage I had left behind, I knew I had made my point. She could never undo the damage she had caused. When Amanda finally tracked me down, it wasn't with an apology or remorse. She showed up at my office, frantic, her face pale and filled with desperation. She'd spent the last few days trying to piece together what had happened, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. But there was no understanding for her. No amount of pleading or excuses could change what she had done. She stood there, looking lost, her hands trembling as she spoke. "Where's the money? What happened? Why did you do this?" She could barely get the words out, as though she was still trying to convince herself that it was all some mistake. She had no idea how far I'd gone, how much I had planned. All her questions were like echoes in an empty room, meaningless, hollow. I stayed calm, deliberately detached, watching her squirm. "You made your choices," I said, my voice, even though the anger I had been holding back, was barely contained. "You didn't think about the consequences when you were playing your games with Daniel and Erica, did you? You didn't think about me, about us. But now you're seeing what happens when everything you take for granted disappears." Her face shifted between confusion and anger, her eyes filling with tears as she tried to make sense of the wreckage. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wasn't thinking straight. It just happened." She was begging for a chance, trying to justify what she had done by making it sound like a series of mistakes, like some random string of events that had spiraled out of control. But I wasn't buying it. "You weren't thinking straight. You think that makes this okay? You think I'm just supposed to forget what you've done? You've destroyed everything. Not just the house or the money, everything between us. And for what? For some thrill with your boss and secretary. Some cheap thrill that meant more to you than the life we built." Her eyes darted around, looking for something, anything that could help her explain herself, but I wasn't going to give her that comfort. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her tears and excuses. She had already done enough damage. She had already broken something so fundamental between us that no amount of regret could fix it. I watched as she crumpled, her shoulders shaking with the weight of everything crashing down on her. "I thought I could have it all," she whispered, her voice raw. "I thought I could have the career, the excitement, the passion. I didn't think you'd find out. I didn't think I'd lose you." At that moment, I could feel the finality of it all. There was no more space for negotiation, no more room for healing. She was right. She had thought she could have it all. She had thought she could juggle everything without consequence. But now everything she had taken for granted was gone, and she was left standing there with nothing but the wreckage of her choices. "You've lost me, Amanda," I said quietly. "Not just because of what you did, but because you stopped caring about us. You stopped caring about me a long time ago. This whole thing, this affair, wasn't just about sex. It was about the lies, the deceit. It was about you choosing them over me, over everything we had. And now you want me to feel sorry for you. You think you can just walk back in here and fix it. Her face twisted in pain as the reality set in. She had known deep down that this moment was inevitable, but she hadn't expected it to feel like this. She hadn't expected the complete emotional withdrawal, the coldness that had overtaken me. She was right to be shocked. She was right to be scared. Because the person she thought she could manipulate, the person who would always forgive her, was gone. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Please, just give me another chance. I'll fix everything. We can fix this." But I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to fix anything with her. There was no repairing the damage she had caused. I didn't owe her that. "It's too late for that," I replied flatly, my eyes hardening. "You had your chance. And you blew it." I watched as she stood there, completely broken, unable to process what was happening. She thought she could come back and find some kind of solace, some kind of redemption, but I had already seen enough. I had already moved on in my mind. The trust we once had was gone, and no matter how much she begged, no matter how much she cried, there was no going back. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there. As I walked out, the weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long seemed to lift. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again,